Got a juicy one for y'all today. You've heard of Montezuma, Cortez, Tenochtitlan? Well, right here I have the Letters of Cortez, the 5 letters of relation from Fernando Cortes to the Emperor Charles V. This is a reprint of a 1908 translation by Francis MacNutt. I've got some of the best passages and the whole account bookmarked for you here, especially going into what Tenochtitlan or Mexico City was like back in 1519 when this was written, translated from Spanish to English, of course. And the capture, death of Montezuma, some internal strife with Panfilo de Narvaez, who headed the Cabeza de Vaca expedition. Well, Cabeza de Vaca was just a member of the expedition. He wrote the account because he was basically one of the last survivors from the expedition. I read that last time they're going up to Texas. So this is all in Mexico, though. In Mesoamerica, we all know, is quite the civilization at the time. So it's very fascinating and a pretty reliable account. Y'all have been enjoying this reading, so I thought I'd keep going. I have a lot of really, really interesting things about North America that basically no one seems to know about. If you don't follow me on the Instagram or whatever, I got some juicy shorts on the YouTube. YouTube is really where my passion's at, but I pick out the best parts of these readings and put those on Instagram Reels, and those seem to be popping off. So I hear y'all appreciate them, and I'm glad because they are very interesting, and my account is mostly ethnobiology, but I come across these very fascinating, just general cultural accounts, and I have no outlet to share them, but I'm glad that they're working out here. So let's start. He's going to give you a general description of Mexico City, Tenochtitlan. Before beginning to describe this great city and the others which I mentioned in the other chapter, it appears to me that to understand them better I should describe Mexico, which where this great city, some others of which I have spoken, and the principal seat of Montezuma's dominion are. This province is circular and completely surrounded by high and rugged mountains. Its plain is perhaps 70 leagues in circumference, in which there are 2 lakes, that's Chalco and Texcoco, occupying almost all of it, for a canoe travels 50 leagues within the borders, and one of these lakes is of fresh water, and the other larger one is salt. The lakes are divided from one another on one side by a small chain of very high hills, in the middle of one end of the plain. Except for a strait between these hills and the high mountains, the strait is about a bow shot across. Communication between one lake and the other, and between the cities and the other towns round about, is by means of canoes, with no need of going by land. The large salt lake rises and falls in its tides like the sea, its waters, whenever it rises, falling into the freshwater lake as rapidly as though it were a great river, and when it ebbs, the fresh water then runs into the salt lake. This great city of Temixtitan is built on the salt lake, and the mainland to the city is a distance of 2 leagues from any side from which you enter. It has 4 approaches by means of artificial causeways, 2 cavalry lances in width. The city is as large as Seville or Cordoba. Its streets, I speak of the principal ones, are very broad and straight. Some of these and all of the others are 1/2 land, and the other half water, on which they go about in canoes. All the streets have openings at regular intervals to let the water flow from one to the other, and at all these openings, some of which are very broad, there are bridges, very large, strong, and well constructed, so that over many 10 horsemen can ride abreast. Perceiving that, if the inhabitants wished to practice any treachery against us, they had plenty of opportunity, because the said city being built as I have described, they might, by raising the bridges at the exits and entrances, starve us without our being able to reach land. As soon as I entered the city, I made great haste to build 4 brigantines, which I had completed in a short time, capable, whenever we might wish, of taking 300 men and the horses to land. Brigantine is just a ship. Boat. The city has many squares where markets are held and trading is carried on. There is one square twice as large as that of Salamanca, all surrounded by arcades, where there are daily more than 60,000 souls, buying and selling, and where are found all kinds of merchandises, produced in these countries, including food products, jewels of gold and silver, lead, brass, copper, zinc, stone, bones, shells, and feathers. Stones are sold, hewn and unhewn, adobe bricks, wood, both in the rough and manufactured in various ways. There's a street for game where they sell every sort of bird, such as chickens, partridges, quails, wild ducks, flycatchers, widgeons, turtle doves, pigeons, reed birds, parrots, owls, eaglets, owlets, falcons, sparrowhawks, kestrels, and they sell the skins of some of the birds of prey with their feathers, heads, beaks, and claws. They sell rabbits, hares, and small dogs, which they castrate and raise for the purpose of eating. This is probably the Xoloitzcuintle, a very famous hairless breed from Mexico. It's black. It was also considered to be like related with the underworld deity, I believe, similar to, was it Hoth or Anubis, one of those Egyptian ones. Anyway, Xoloitzcuintle. Try to spell that. There is a street set apart for the sale of herbs, where can be found every sort of root and medical herb which grows in the country. There are houses like apothecary shops where prepared medicines are sold, as well as the liquids, ointments, and plasters. There are places like our barber shops where they wash and shave their heads. There are houses where they supply food and drink for payment. There are men, such as in Castile, are called porters, who carry burdens. There is much wood, charcoal, braziers made of earthenware, and mats and diverse kinds for beds, and others, very thin, used as cushions and for carpeting halls and bedrooms. There are all sorts of vegetables, and especially onions, leeks, garlic, borage, nasturtium, watercresses, sorrel, thistles, and artichokes. There are many kinds of fruits, amongst others cherries and prunes, like the Spanish ones. They sell beeswax and honey made of corn stalks, which is sweet and syrup-like as that of sugar. Also honey of a plant called maguey, which is better than most. From these same plants they make sugar and wine, which they also sell. So that last passage is referring to agave americana. Most likely other agave species could be used for this, but that was the most common one used. So the central stalk of the agave, there was a hole drilled into that, and from which the sap flowed. It was also done in other ways where the whole central spike was cut out and then it forms a basin of the agave plant in the middle of that rosette form, and that basin fills up with the sap of the agave, and that is ladled out and used for, it's a sweetener, it's very sweet sap, and the bottom of that can be scraped off. This is still done to this day in Mexico. Pulque is made from it, which is a lightly fermented, that sap that has been lightly fermented. But yeah, it's agave sap. And agaves have to be a certain age to be able to make that sap. I believe about 10 years old and older is when they start being able to produce that sap. I've tried it on a plant that was only like 5 years old and definitely didn't work. But agaves live from about 10 to 30 years old, and or agave americana, even though it's called century plant, that's its normal lifespan, and it doesn't take 100 years for it to flower. It flowers after 10 years or up to 30 years. And they also say that the whole plant dies after flowering, but you know, it doesn't really, because those little sucker plants that come up underneath agaves, those are branches of the same plant. So really one branch, the main branch of the plant dies, but you know, we can call it monocarpic, or you know, which is a plant that dies after fruiting once if we want. And the other instances of things, produce here, interesting. Onions, wild onions, leeks, wild leeks. You know, these are different allium species, garlic species. That's not Allium sativum or Allium cepa, which would be our commercial onion garlic. They basically just have their own native forms of that. I don't know what species they would be using for that, but it's very interesting. Borage, I don't know what that would be. There are plenty of borage crops that have been used for greens. But I can't think of one. Nasturtium watercresses, Roripa, or that's the genus, or Nasturtium, the genus. Those are well-known wild edibles, and it being so much water in the area, these are typically water-growing plants, so I'm sure those grow a lot. Sorrel, that would be the genus Oxalis, very good edible, although actually that's probably referring to the genus Rumex, now that I think about it. Oxalis is a really tiny plant, wouldn't make a good produce, but Rumex are also called sorrels, and those produce larger greens that are really good. There's a lot of rumex species native to North America. Thistles, this could be in the genus Cirsium or Carduus. All of them are edible, especially the roots. Artichokes, genus Carduus, I believe. And the fruits, prunes and cherries, those aren't going to be, like he says, the Spanish ones. I mean, they will be in the same genus, Prunus. Prunus has many different edible species in North America. I want to say like at least 20 or 30, probably more. At least that have fleshy fruits. There are some that are like an almond form that have like a husk, like a walnut or a pecan, and they have like an internal kernel, like an almond. But the Prunus genus has a lot of delicious cherries and plums. The cherries are typically smaller and have red flesh, and the plums typically have like a white or yellow flesh, and the plums are typically bigger as well. So I'm not sure what species those would have been. I'm not as familiar with the Mexican flora, but there's probably at least several. And bees, honey, and wax, that's actually not going to be from Apis mellifera. Apis mellifera wasn't introduced until I believe the early 1600s in Virginia. The first colony was established, but there is a stingless bee that was used for its honey in Mexico, and I believe still today. I can't remember the genus or anything on that, but it was going to be a stingless bee. Very interesting. And the honey made of corn stalks is also interesting. So basically kind of a molasses being produced, or corn syrup, and the McGuire. Anyway, I probably ranted about that way too much, but that's my big interest, is ethnobotany. So let's continue with the market of Tenochtitlan here. They also sell skeins of different kinds of spun cotton in all colors, so that it seems quite like one of the silk markets of Granada, although it is on a greater scale. Also as many different colors for painters as can be found in Spain, and of as excellent hues. They sell deer skins with all the hair tanned on them, and of different colors, much earthenware exceedingly good, many sorts of pots, large and small, pitchers, large tiles, an infinite variety of vases, all of very singular clay, and most of them glazed and painted. They sell maize, corn, both in the grain and made into bread, which is very superior in its quality to that of the other islands and mainlands. Not surprised there. Pies of birds and of fish, also much fish, fresh, salted, cooked, and raw, eggs of hens and geese and of other birds in great quantity, and cakes made of eggs. Finally, besides these things I have mentioned, they sell in the city markets everything else which is found in the whole country, and which, on account of the profusion and number, do not occur to my memory, and which I do also tell of because I do not know their names. Each kind of merchandise is sold in its respective street, and they do not mix their kinds of merchandise of any species, thus they preserve perfect order. Everything is sold by a kind of measure, and until now we have not seen anything sold by weight. There is in this square a very large building like a court of justice, where there are always 10 or 12 persons sitting as judges and delivering their decisions on all cases which arise in the markets. There are other persons in the same square who go about continually among the people, observing what is sold and the measures used in selling, and they have been seen to break some which were false. This great city contains many mosques, or houses for idols. It's weird that in this entire account he calls basically temples mosques. So we're talking about, every time I say mosque, I'm just going to repeat his words, is going to be a temple, which you can still see to this day in many locations around Mexico and Guatemala, Central America. So this great city contains many mosques, or houses for idols, very beautiful edifices situated in the different precincts of it. So this is actually around the time of the Moorish conquest of Spain. I can't remember exactly when that was, but that's probably why he's calling it mosque, because he just associates it with a very beautiful place of worship. There was obviously Christians at the time. These are Christians that we're talking about. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just a mistranslation. Anyway, total aside here. Very beautiful edifices situated in the different precincts of it, and the principal ones of which are the religious orders of their sect, for whom, besides the houses in which they keep their idols, there are very good habitations provided. All these priests dress in black and never cut or comb their hair from the time they enter the religious order until they leave it, and the sons of all the principal families, both of chiefs as well as noble citizens, are in these religious orders and habits from at the age of 7 or 8 years till they are taken away for the purpose of marriage. This happens more frequently with the firstborn who inherit the property than with the others. They have no access to women, nor are they allowed to enter the religious houses. They abstain from eating certain dishes, and more so at certain times of the year than at others. Amongst these mosques, there is a principal one, and no human tongue is able to describe its greatness and details, because it is so large that within its circuit, which is surrounded by a high wall, a village of 500 houses could easily be built. Within and all around it are very handsome buildings, in which there are large rooms and galleries where the religious live there and are lodged. There are as many as 40 very high and well-built towers, the largest having 50 steps to reach the top. The principal one is higher than the tower of the chief church in Seville. They are so well built, both in their masonry and their woodwork, that they could not have been better made nor constructed anywhere, for all the masonry inside the chapels where they keep their idols is carved with figures, and the woodwork is all wrought with designs of monsters and other shapes. All these towers are places of burial for the chiefs, and each one of their chapels is dedicated to the idol to which they have a particular devotion. Within this great mosque, there are 3 halls wherein stand the principal idols of marvelous grandeur and size, and much decorated with carved figures, both of stone and wood. And within these halls there are other chapels, entered by very small doors, and which have no light, and nobody but the religious are admitted to them. Within these are the images and figures of the idols, although, as I have said, there are many outside. So he starts to go on about idols and idolatry and how much he doesn't like it, and how heathen they are, and talks about Montezuma and their chiefs and their idolatry. I'm skipping over a little bit to get to the interesting part. He does cover that they have aqueducts and throughout all of the city, basically water flow, and goes a little bit into the royalty, more about the ruling class. Not very interesting stuff here, but I'll describe Montezuma's palace. He had a house, Montezuma, a little inferior to this one, where there was a beautiful garden with arbors overhanging it, of which the marbles and tiles were of jasper, beautifully worked. In this house there were apartments for 2 great princes and all their servants. It had 10 pools of water, in which were kept all the many and diverse breeds of waterfowl found in these parts, all domesticated, for the seabirds too. There were pools of salt water, and for those of the rivers and lakes there was fresh water, for which the sake of cleanliness they renewed at certain times by means of pipes. To each kind of bird they gave the food which suited its habits in its free state, so that those which ate fish they gave it, and likewise worms, maize, and smaller seeds were supplied as required by the different birds. I assure your highness that all these birds which ate only fish received each day 250 pounds caught in the salt lakes. 300 men had the charge of these birds for their sole employment. There were others who were occupied only in curing the birds which were ailing. Over each pool for these birds there were beautifully decorated galleries and corridors, where Montezuma came to amuse himself by watching them. There was an apartment in this house in which were men, women, and children, white of face, body, hair, and eyelashes from the day of their birth. There was an albinos. There was another very beautiful house with a large court paved with flags in the pattern of a chessboard. There were also houses about 9 feet in height and about 6 paces square. Each half of one was covered with a roofing of square tiles, and the other half, which was open, had a stout lattice of wood. Each of these houses contained a bird of prey, representing all sorts known in Spain, from the kestrel to the eagle, besides many other kinds which had never been seen there, and there were great numbers of each of these kinds. Across the tops of these houses there was a perch, and another one out beyond the lattice, so that the birds might use the one at night when it was raining, and the other to sun themselves and to take the air. All these birds were fed daily on chickens, with no other food. There were certain large rooms in this palace fitted with great cages, very well constructed, and joined with heavy timbers, in all or most of which were kept lions, tigers, foxes, and every kind of cat in considerable numbers. These were also fed on chickens. 300 other men had charge of these animals and birds. So obviously not actually lions and tigers, but surely the jaguar, the puma, the mountain lion, and like you said, every kind of cat, which include the ocelot, the yagarundi. There's several others in that area, but perhaps they're importing even more. There were another house in which many monstrous men and women lived, amongst whom were dwarfs, hunchbacks, and deformed, and in each manner of monster had a room apart, and they also had persons to take charge of them. I did not mention the other diverting things Montezuma had in the city because there were so many and so various. So yeah, extremely ostentatious. He goes on to talk about the followers of Montezuma and his court and the etiquette therein. It's very extravagant. Dressed themselves 4 times a day in 4 different kinds of clothing, and would never be dressed with the same clothing again once worn. There's some very juicy stuff right ahead, though. So Narvaez has arrived, and he's basically staging a coup against Cortez. Cortez is supposed to be a leader, but Narvaez is kind of a leader in his own right, and they're beefing. They got some issues. They want to fight. One of them wants to be ruler of Mexico, and the other one also wants to be ruler of Mexico. Both of them are basically just plotting to take all of this that they see. So they do battle. So let's get to where that occurs. Let's skip ahead here. Or you know what? I'm going to skip the battle between Cortez and Narvaez. It's resolved. Cortez wins. But, it's quite an issue. And, of course, the Mexican peoples, are, like indigenous Mexicans, obviously, are like, what the heck is going on with y'all? So, here is going to be a battle with... So basically, after that battle between Narvaez and Cortez, it kind of emboldens the natives to fight back against Cortez. They don't really like where this is all going. There's a lot of factions, a lot of stuff going on. I'm not going to pretend like I understand it all in depth. It's really not much of a point to get into, but it is fascinating to listen to the account of the battles between Cortez and the natives. The next day after Mass, I sent a messenger to Vera Cruz to give them the good news that the Christians were alive and that I was safe in the city. The messenger returned within half an hour with his head all bruised and broken, calling out the Indians in the city were in array of battle and had raised all the bridges, and immediately after him such a great multitude fell upon us from all sides that neither the roofs nor the houses could be seen for the crowd, which came on with the greatest shoutings and most frightful yells which could be conceived in the world. With their slings they threw so many stones into the fortress that it seemed as if they rained from the heavens, while arrows and missiles were so thick that all the buildings and courts were so full of them that we could hardly move about. I sallied forth against them on 2 or 3 sides, where they fought as very valiantly, and in one place where a captain had gone out with 200 men, they killed 4, and wounded him and many others before he could retreat. On the other side where I was engaged, they wounded me and many other Spaniards. We killed few of them, for they retreated to the other side of the bridges, and from the roofs and terraces did us much injury with the stones. Some terraces we captured and set on fire, but they were so many and so strong and so filled with people, well supplied with stones and other kinds of weapons, that we were not strong enough to take them all, nor to defend ourselves against their attack at their pleasure. They attacked the fort so violently, and set fire to it in so many places, that on one side a great part was destroyed without our being able to prevent it, until we stopped it by breaking the walls and pulling down a part which put out the fire. Had it not been for the strong guard of musketeers and archers with some field pieces, cannons, I placed there, they would have scaled that part without our being able to resist them. Thus we fought all that day until night was well advanced, and even throughout the night they kept up their cries and yells. During the night I had those breaches caused by the fire repaired, and all the rest of the fort which seemed weak to me. I distributed the watch and the guards, for on the next day we would have to fight stoutly, and I cared for more than 80 wounded. At dawn the following day, the enemy opened the battle more stoutly than the day before, there being such a number of them that the artillery had no need to aim but just shoot into the masses of Indians. Although the artillery did much damage, for 13 arquebuses, muskets, were playing. Besides muskets and archery, there was also doing service, it seemed, as they did not feel it, for when one discharge would sweep away 10 or 12 men, more would immediately fill their places, as if it had done no harm at all. Leaving the necessary guards, such as could be spared, in the fort, I made again a sortie, and captured some bridges and burnt some houses, killing many of the defenders, but they were so numerous that, although we did them a great deal of damage, we made very little impression on them. We had to fight all day long, while they fought by hours, because they relieved one another, and even thus they had more than enough men. That day they also wounded some 50 or 60 Spaniards, although none of them died, and I fought until nightfall, retiring only from sheer fatigue into the fort. Seeing the great damage the enemy did us, and how they wounded and killed us at will, and that although we did much injury against them, it was hardly perceptible on account of their number, we spent that whole night and the next day in making 3 engines of wood, each accommodating 20 men, so that they could not hurt us from throwing stones from the roofs, for the engines were covered with planks. Inside there were archers and musketeers, and others armed with pikes, pickaxes, and bars of iron for making breaches in the houses, and knocking down the barricades which the Indians had made in the streets. While these machines were being made, the combat with our adversaries did not cease, for whenever we went out of the fort, they would strive to enter, being repulsed only with great difficulty. Montezuma, who with one of his sons and many other chiefs had been captured at the beginning, was still a prisoner, asked to be carried to the... Oh, I don't know how I'm forgetting this. This is a crucial part of the story. After the battle with Narvaez, Cortez basically just captures Montezuma and has been holding him as a prisoner. That's why they're attacking the fort. I'm sorry, I haven't read this whole account in a while. But yeah, they got Montezuma as a prisoner at this point. That's why everyone's trying to attack him and get him back. Montezuma, who with one of his sons and many other chiefs had been captured at the beginning, was still a prisoner, asked to be carried to the roof of the fort, where he could speak to the captains and the people, and cause the war to cease. I had him taken thither, and when he reached the parapet on top of the fort, intending to speak to the people who were fighting there, one of his own subjects struck him in the head with a stone with such force that within 3 days he died. Good job, idiot. I then had him taken out, dead as he was, by 2 of the Indian prisoners, who bore him away to his people. But I do not know what they did with him, except that the war did not cease, but went on more stoutly and more fiercely every day. The same day they called to me to a place where they had wounded Montezuma, saying that certain captains wished to speak to me. I went, and there passed many arguments between us, I beseeching them not to fight with me, because there was no reason for it, as they must perceive the benefits they had received from me, and how they had been well treated by me. Their answer was that I must depart and leave them their country, and then the war would cease, and that otherwise I might be sure that they would either die or finish us. It appears that they did this to draw me out of the fort, so that they might, at their pleasure, trap me between the bridges, while in the act of leaving the city. I answered that they must not think I begged for peace from fear of them, but because I was grieved at the damage I had done them, and would still have to do them, and also for the destruction of such a beautiful city. Still, they answered that they would not cease to make war upon me until I left the city. After having completed the engines, I sallied out the next day to capture certain roofs and bridges, carrying the engines before us, followed by 4 pieces of artillery, many archers and shield bearers, and more than 3,000 natives of Tlaxcaltecal who had come with me and helped the Spaniards. When we reached one of the bridges, we placed the engines and scaling ladders against the walls of the terraces in order to scale them, but the defenders of the said bridges and terraces were so numerous and threw so many and such large stones at us from above that they injured the engines and killed some of the Spaniards and wounded many without our being able to advance 1 pace, although we struggled for it, fighting from morning till noon, when we returned to the fort with infinite sorrow. Their courage was increased so much by this that they attacked us almost at the very doors and occupied the great temple. About 500 who appeared to me to be most noble persons ascended from the highest and principal tower, carrying up a large supply of bread and water and other stores. Most of them had very long lances with very broad points, all longer and broader than ours, and not less sharpened. Apparently this was, it says it's of obsidian in the footnote, but it wasn't necessarily, but probably. 2 or 3 times the Spaniards attacked the tower and attempted to mount it, but as it was very high, the ascent very steep, being 100 and odd steps, and those above were well supplied with stones and other arms, and favored by the fact that we could not capture the neighboring terraces every time the Spaniards attacked. Every time the Spaniards attempted to ascend, they were rolled back beaten, and many were wounded. Others of the enemy who saw this from other parts took fresh courage, so that they attacked the fort fiercely. Observing that if they succeeded in holding that tower, besides doing us much injury for it, they also gained fresh courage to attack us, I sallied out from the fort, although my left hand was maimed by a wound which I had received on the first day. I advanced to the tower with some Spaniards who followed me, and easily succeeded in surrounding the base, although those who surrounded it were not idle, as they have had to fight adversaries on all sides, who, for the purpose of helping their own men, came in increased numbers. And I began to ascend the tower, followed by some Spaniards, but they defended the ascent very stubbornly, throwing down 3 or 4 of my followers. With the help of God and his glorious mother, we reached the top, where we fought them so stoutly that they were forced to jump down on some terraces about a pace broad which extended round it. This tower had 3 or 4 of these terraces about 16 feet one above the other. Some of the enemy fell all the way down, and in addition to the injuries they received in the fall, were immediately killed by the Spaniards who surrounded the base of the tower. Those who remained on the terrace fought so valiantly that we were more than 3 hours in completely dispatching them, and not one escaped. Your sacred majesty may believe that we captured this tower only because God had clipped their wings, because 20 of them were sufficient to resist the ascent of 1,000 men, even though they fought very valiantly till death. I had the tower set on fire, as well as others in the mosque, from which they had already taken away and carried off the images we placed in them. So let's continue this account. In the daytime, I could feel my reading was becoming less animated, and I wanted to properly give this account. And so we're in the middle of the battles here, in which there are many. And I was thinking one reason to put forth this account is to sort of change the perception of Cortez's conquest of Mexico, of something as like popularly thought of as he kind of just went in there and dominated, and he just kind of did whatever and killed Montezuma and took over. But no, it was battles and battles after battles, and they were constantly fighting on all sides and just barely making out of there, which is kind of the case with basically all of the Spanish expeditions. As soon as the Indians saw what they were up to, because they were kind of coming in there with just armies, and that was the attitude of the Spaniards, was to basically invading countries with armies. You got to remember they've been coming out of the 100 Years' War at this time and are extremely proficient in all these field tactics and all the armaments and horses and everything as far as conquest and battle and war. And so that's why they're able to survive, basically. But and it's admirable that they're even, well, if you can call it that, they're able to survive. But it's definitely was not them just waltzing in and dominating because they are so superior. They are just making out by the skin of their teeth. So Montezuma's just died. I mean, this is a video, so you already heard it all. But Montezuma had just died, and they're still in battle at that same place. Some of their pride was taken out of them by our obtaining this advantage, so that they turned back a little on all sides, and I afterwards returned to the roof, and I spoke to the captains who had talked with me before, and who were somewhat dismayed by what they had seen. They immediately appeared, and I told them to look about and see that they could not hold out anywhere, and that every day we did them great harm and killed many, and that we were forced to burn and destroy their city, for I would not stop until there was nothing left of it, or them. They answered that they saw very well that they had sustained much damage from us, and that many of them had perished, but that they were already all fully determined to die or be rid of us, and that I might behold all these streets and squares and terraces were filled with people who were so numerous that they had made their calculations that if 25,000 of them perished for every one of ours, they would finish with us first, for we were few and they were many. They told me that all the high roads leading to the entrances to the city had been destroyed, as, in fact, they had destroyed all save one, and that we had no way of escape save by water, and that they knew that very well, and as we had few provisions and little fresh water, we could not hold out much longer, for we would die by hunger, even if it did not kill us. Even if they did not kill us. In truth, they were right, for though we had no other enemy save starvation and the want of provisions, these would suffice to kill us in short time. We exchanged many other arguments, each sustaining his own side. When the night set in, I sallied forth with certain Spaniards, and as we took them by surprise, we captured a street from them, burning more than 300 houses. I quickly returned by another street, while the people had assembled in that one, in which I also burned many houses, especially some terraces which overlooked the fort, from which they did us much damage. They were greatly frightened by what we had done that night, and during the same night I ordered the engines, which had been damaged the day before, to be repaired. In order to follow up the victory God had given us, I sallied forth at daybreak into the same street where we had been routed the day before, where I had found out not less resistance than on the former occasion. As our lives and honor were at stake, and that street led to the only sound causeway extending to the mainland, though before reaching it we had to pass by 8 very large and deep bridges, and all the street there were many quite high terraces and towers. We set our determination and spirit in it, so that, God helping us, we gained 4 of them that day and burned all the terraces and houses and towers to the last of the bridges. They had, however, during the night before, made a number of very strong barricades of adobes and clay at all the bridges, so that the discharges of arrows from the crossbows could do them no harm. We filled in the bridges with the adobes and earth from the enclosures, and with a quantity of stones and wood from the houses we had burned, although this work was not done without danger, and many Spaniards were wounded. That night I took many precautions to guard those bridges, so that they might not return and retake them. The next morning I again sallied forth, and God gave us likewise such good fortune and victory, although innumerable people defended the bridges and many strong barricades which they had made during the night before, yet we captured them all and filled them up. At the same time certain horsemen followed victoriously in pursuit of the fugitives as far as the mainland. While I was engaged in repairing the bridges and in having them filled up, I was called in great haste, being told that the Indians who attacked the fort were suing for peace, and that certain chiefs and captains of them were awaiting me. Leaving my people and certain field pieces there, I, with 2 or 3 horsemen, went to see what the chiefs wanted. They said that if I would assure them that they would not be punished for what had occurred, they would raise the siege, re-establish the bridges, restore the causeways, and serve your majesty, King Charles or Emperor Charles, as they had before. They besought me to have brought there one of their people, a religious who I have made a prisoner, and who was similar to a superior of their religion, a priest. He came and spoke with them, and made an agreement between them and me, as it appeared, and according to what they had said, they immediately sent messengers to the captains and people who were in outside camps, telling them that the attack on the fort should cease, as well as all other hostilities. Thus we took our leave, and I entered the fort to eat. When I was about to begin, someone hastily came to say that the Indians had regained the bridges which we had captured that day, and had killed some Spaniards. God only knows how much disturbance this caused me, for I was thinking that we had assured a passage for our retreat. I mounted my horse with all possible haste, and rode the length of the street, with some other horsemen following me, and, without halting anywhere, I again dashed through the Indians, and recaptured the bridges, pursuing the enemy to the mainland. As the foot soldiers were very tired, and wounded, and dismayed, none of them followed me, and this left me in a very dangerous situation after I had passed the bridges. When I sought to return, I found them retaken and more deeply dug out than we had filled them up, and from one side to another all the causeway was full of people, not only on land but also in canoes on the water, who goaded us and stoned us with slings, in such a manner that if God had not interposed to save us, it would have been impossible to escape. Indeed, it was even already announced in the city that I was dead. When I reached the last bridge nearest the city, I found all the horsemen who had gone with me fallen in it, and one horse loose, so that I could not pass, but was obliged to return alone in the face of my enemies. I forced something of a passage so that the horses passed, and after this I found the bridge free, though I crossed with much trouble, for I had to jump the horse from one side to the other almost 6 feet. But as I and he were armored, they did us no serious hurt beyond slight body wounds. Thus victory was theirs that night, for they had captured the said 4 bridges. Leaving a guard over the other 4, I went to the fort and had a wooden bridge constructed which 40 men could carry, and seeing our great danger and the great damage we daily received from the Indians, and fearing also that they might destroy that causeway as they had the others, when we would all inevitably perish, and because many of my company entreated me many times to depart, and because all or nearly all were wounded so badly that they could no longer fight, I determined to leave that same night. I collected in a room all the gold and jewels belonging to your majesty that could be carried, and I delivered it in parcels to the officials of your highness, who I designated in your royal name, beseeching and requiring the alcaldes and municipal authorities and all the people who were there to help me take it away. I gave one of my mares for this purpose, on which they loaded as much as she could carry, and I designated certain Spaniards, not only for my servants, but also of the others, to accompany the said gold and mare, and the rest of the officials, alcaldes, municipal officers, and myself gave and distributed the remainder to the Spaniards to carry away. Having abandoned the fort and much treasure belonging not only to your highness, but also to the Spaniards and myself, I set forth as secretly as possible, taking with me a son and 2 daughters of Montezuma, Cacamazin, the lord of Aculiucan, and another of his brothers, whom I had put in his place, and some other chiefs of the provinces and cities whom I held as prisoners. When we reached the bridges which the Indians had removed, we laid down the bridge which I carried with little trouble at the first crossing, for there was none to offer resistance save certain watchmen who shouted so loudly that, before we came to the second, an infinite multitude of the enemy had risen against us, battling on every side, both on water and land. I crossed rapidly with 5 horsemen and 500 foot soldiers, with whom I passed all the other broken bridges, swimming until I reached the mainland. Leaving these people there, I returned to the others and found that they were fighting stoutly, but the injury our people received was beyond calculation. Not only the Spaniards, but also the Tlascaltecas who were with us, being nearly all killed. Though the Spaniards killed many natives, many of the Spaniards and horses were killed, likewise, and all the gold and jewels and many other things which we carried and all the artillery were lost. When the survivors were collected, I pushed them on ahead, while I, with 3 or 4 horsemen and about 20 foot soldiers, who ventured to remain with me, took the rear guard, fighting the Indians until we arrived at a city called Tacuba, at the end of the causeway. God only knows how much trouble and danger I endured, because every time I faced about against our adversaries, I came back full of arrows and darts and stones, for as there was water on both sides, they could assail us with impunity and fearlessly. When we attacked those on land, they would leap into the water, thus receiving very little hurt, except that some who in the skirmish interfered with each other and fell were killed. With great trouble and fatigue, I conducted my remaining people to the city of Tacuba, without being killed myself, nor having any Spaniard or Indian wounded, except 1 horseman who had gone with me to the rear. Those who went in the vanguard did not have less fighting than those on the flanks, although the strongest force was the one at our backs, where the people of the city pursued us. When I reached the city of Tacuba, I found all the people in a panic in the square, not knowing where to go, so I made great haste to get them out of the country before more than the inhabitants should gather in the said city and capture the roofs, from which they could do us great injury. The vanguard said that they did not know the way, so I sent them to the rear and took the lead myself until we got clear of the city, where I awaited them at some farms. When the rear guard came up, I learned that some had sustained some injury, and that some of the Spaniards and Indians had been killed, and that much gold had been lost and left on the road, where the Indians gathered it up. I held the Indians in check until all the people had passed on, so that the foot soldiers might take the hill, on which there stood a strong tower and buildings. These they captured without sustaining any injury, for I did not leave my place nor allow the enemy to advance until they had secured the hill. God only knows the trouble and fatigue we sustained, for no horse of the 24 was left which could still run, nor any horseman who could raise his arms, nor a sound foot soldier who could move. When we reached the buildings, we fortified ourselves in them, and the enemy surrounded us and besieged us until night, not leaving us an hour's rest. We found that over 150 Spaniards were killed in this fight, 45 mares and horses, and more than 2,000 of the Indians who had aided the Spaniards. Amongst the latter, they killed the sons and daughters of Montezuma and all the other chiefs whom we carried prisoners. At midnight, believing we were not observed, we left the said lodgings very silently, leaving many fires burning in it, not knowing any road, nor where we were going, except that an Indian of Tascatecal told us he would guide us to his country if they did not stop us on the way. There were some watchmen very near who heard us and alarmed many towns round about, from which numbers of people gathered and pursued us until daybreak. At that time, 5 horsemen who rode ahead as scouts met some bands of people along the road and killed some of them. These were routed under the belief that more horsemen and foot soldiers were coming up. When I saw that our enemies were gathering from all sides, I got into order our people, who were still fit for service, making squadrons and flanking them in the vanguard, rear guard, and on the flanks, and the wounded in the center, and I likewise distributed the horsemen. Thus we continued all that day, fighting on all sides, so that during the whole night and day we did not advance more than 3 leagues. When night came on, our Lord was pleased to show us a tower and good lodging place on the hill, where we again fortified ourselves, and during that night they left us in peace. Although at dawn we had some disturbance from a false alarm caused by our own fears of the multitude which kept coming in pursuit of us. The next morning, 1 hour after daybreak, I departed into the order already mentioned, taking my vanguard and rear guard in good order, and on all sides were followed by the enemy, yelling and raising the whole country, which is thickly populated. The horsemen, although we were few, attacked them, but did little harm amongst them, because the ground being rough, they would retreat to the hills. In this manner we marched that day upon some lakes. These are the lakes of Zampugo, Zaltocan, and San Cristobal, till we reached a populous town, where we thought to have some skirmish with the townspeople. When we arrived there, they abandoned it and went to some other towns thereabouts in the neighborhood. I rested there that day and the next, not only because both the wounded and the sound ones of my people were both very weary and exhausted with hunger and thirst, and the horses likewise were well tired out, but also because we found there some maize, which we ate and carried away with us on the road, boiled and roasted. We left the next day, always pursued by our adversaries, who attacked us on the vanguard and our rear guard with many yells. We continued our march, guided by the Indian of Tascatecal, during which we suffered many trouble and fatigue, for many times we lost our way. When it was already late, we reached a plain where there were some small houses in which we lodged that night, suffering great want of food. Early next morning we began our march, and before we reached the road, our enemies still followed our rear guard. Constantly skirmishing with them, we arrived at a large town 2 leagues distant, where there were some Indians stationed at the top of a small hill to the right. Believing that we might capture them as they went near the road, and also discover if there were just beyond the hill any more than those who were visible, I started round the said hill with 5 horsemen and 12 foot soldiers, and behind it there was a great city of many people with whom we engaged fiercely. This is the city of Otumba. On account of the rocky country and the great number of the people and the small numbers, we had to retire to the town where our people were. I came out of this very badly wounded in the head by 2 sling stones, and after binding up the wounds, I made the Spaniards leave the town, because it did not seem to me a safe camp for us, and we marched thus with great numbers of Indians pursuing us, fighting so stoutly that they wounded 4 or 5 Spaniards and as many horses. They killed us a horse also, and God only knows how great its value was to us, and what pain we suffered at its death, because, after God, our only security was the horses. But we consoled ourselves with its meat, and ate it without leaving even the skin, so great was our want, for, since leaving the capital, we had nothing to eat but boiled and roasted corn, and not always enough of that, and in addition some herbs which we gathered in the country. Seeing that the enemy increased every day and grew stronger, and that we were becoming weaker, that night I ordered the wounded and sick, whom we carried behind us on our horses, to provide themselves with crutches and other contrivances for supporting themselves, so that the horses and sound Spaniards would be free to fight. From what happened to us the next day, it seemed that the Holy Ghost had inspired me with this thought, for after we had left this camp in the morning and marched about 1.5 leagues, so great a multitude of Indians came out to encounter me, that about us we could not see the ground, so completely was it covered by them. They attacked us on all sides so violently that we could not distinguish each other, for being so pressed and entangled with them. Certainly we believed that to be our last day, so great was the force of the Indians and so feeble the resistance they encountered in us, for we were already exhausted, and almost all of us were wounded and fainting from hunger. But our Lord was pleased to show his great power and mercy to us, for with all our weakness we broke their great pride and haughtiness, and that many of their prominent and important persons perished, for they were so many that they hindered one another, and were unable either to fight or to fly. We spent a great part of the day in this struggle, until it pleased God that one of these persons, who it must have been an important chief, fell, for with his death all the battle ceased. After this we continued our way more easily, although some of them still harassed us until we reached a small house in the plain, where we lodged that night and on the open ground. From there we first descried certain mountains in the provinces of Tascatecal, at which not a little joy filled our hearts, because we recognized the country and knew our way, although we were not quite positive of finding the natives faithful and friendly, for we feared that, seeing us so reduced, they might wish to put an end to our lives in order to recover the liberty which they had formerly enjoyed. This thought and suspicion cast us into an affliction which equaled that which we felt while fighting with the Kuluans. The next morning at daybreak we marched by a very level road which directly led to the said province of Tascatecal, upon which only a few of our adversaries follow, although very near were many large towns and some hills in our rear, though from a distance they still continued yelling at us. On this day, which was Sunday, July 8th, we left all the country of Kalua and entered the province of Tascatecal at a village of some 3,000 or 4,000 households called Gualipan. Footnote: Hueyothlipan, where the natives received us very well and somewhat relieved our great hunger and weariness, although for much of the provision which they gave us, and they asked for payment, and would only accept gold. This we were obliged in our great necessity to give. We remained 3 days in this town, and Magiskatsin, these Nahuatl words, man, and Sikutingal, and all the chiefs of the said province, and some of those of Kwasusingo, came to see and speak to me, showing much grief for what had happened to us, and endeavoring to console me, reminding me that they had often told me that the Kuluans were traitors against whom I should be on my guard, but that I would not believe it. Inasmuch as I had escaped alive, they said I ought to rejoice, for they would aid me until death to obtain satisfaction for the injury the Kuluans had done me. They added that they felt obliged to do this as vassals of your highness, besides which they also suffered because of the many sons and brothers who had perished in my company, and on account of the other injuries which in past times they had received, so I might be sure that they would receive my true and steadfast friends until death. As I had came wounded and almost all of my company exhausted, they wanted us to go into the city, 4 leagues from this town, where we might rest, and they would care for us and restore us. I was very grateful to them, and accepted their invitation, and gave them some few things from the valuables which had escaped, and at which they were well contented. And I went with them to the city, where I likewise had a good reception. Magiskatsin brought me a bedstead of finely finished wood with some bed clothing which they had used for me to sleep in, for we had brought none, and helped everybody with that which he had and could. When I quit the city for Temixtan, I had left here with certain sick persons, and some of my servants with silver and wearing apparel belonging to me, and certain other household things and provisions, in order to march forward unencumbered, lest anything should happen to us, and all the documents and agreements which I had made with the natives of these parts should be lost. All the clothing of which the Spaniards came with me had likewise been left, as they took away only what they wore in their bedding. I learned that another servant of mine had come from Veracruz, bringing provisions and things for me. He had been accompanied by horsemen and 45-foot soldiers, and had likewise taken with him the others whom I had left there. He carried all the silver and clothing, his own as well as that of my companions, with $7,000 of melted gold, which I had left there in 2 chests, without counting other valuables, and other $14,000 of gold in pieces which had been given in the province of Tuchipet, Tuchi, Tuchitapeke. To that captain whom I had sent to build the town of Coacoalco. He carried also many other things which were worth more than $30,000 of gold. This I learned, and also that the Indians of Kahlua had killed them all on the road and taken their treasure. I likewise learned that they had killed on the roads many other Spaniards who were coming to the cities of Tenochtitlan, believing that I was there at peace, and that the roads were as secure as I had before held them. I assure your majesty that all of us were plunged into such sadness by this news that it could hardly have been much worse, because of the loss of these Spaniards, and the treasure recalled the deaths and losses of the Spaniards who had been killed in the city, at the bridges, and on the road, and especially as it roused much suspicion in me that, in like manner, the people of Vera Cruz might have been attacked, that those whom we considered to our friends might have rebelled upon hearing of our defeat. To learn the truth, I immediately dispatched messengers accompanied by Indians to guide them, whom I ordered to avoid the high road until we arrived at Vera Cruz, and to let me know promptly what happened there. It pleased our Lord that they should find the Spaniards very well and the natives perfectly faithful. It was a great relief to learn this after our losses and griefs, though it was very bad news for them to hear of our disaster en route. I remained 20 days in this province of Tascatecal, healing my wounds, which came with the poor care on the road, which had become much worse, especially the wound on my head, and I also had all the wounded of my company cared for. Some of them died, not only from their wounds, but also on account of our past troubles. Others remained maimed in their arms, and others lame in their legs, for their wounds were very bad, and for curing them there was very little means. I myself lost 2 fingers on my left hand. So I'll just end it there. There's not the end of the battles. He is just constantly battling on all sides his entire stay there. He doesn't leave at the end of this account, but he basically just petitions His Majesty, the Emperor Charles V, for aid from Hispaniola. But I hope you found that interesting. I do have some thoughts about it in general that inspires me. That, I always like to challenge popular perception of the colonization of the Americas. There's a lot of misconceptions about a lot of things, and the one about the Spaniards just coming in and dominating is just complete nonsense. The only reason, or one of the biggest reasons, I would say, the Spaniards do prevail or really make any headway at all is their ability to take extreme losses and privation. So, like I said, it's kind of a very war-dominated culture. They're coming out of the 100 Years' War and the plains of Iberia, in Europe. They are a culture that is extremely dominated by that ancient European warrior culture, ability to take extreme privation and death and just accept death of yourself and of your companions, and of just constant suffering, and to just never give up, and kind of like an honor culture type thing. Not that it's what they're doing is honorable, but just as that's a name that's given to a culture that your reputation in battle is basically everything. Because you can also see many mentions to it. They're very, very concerned with wealth and gold, and hoarding wealth and obtaining wealth and gold from Mesoamerica. That's kind of their mission, is to come to Mesoamerica and take whatever they can and bring it back and win glory for themselves back home in Spain. I think most of these people are not really interested in moving to and colonizing it per se. That does happen eventually, but this is the tip of the spear, who are mainly concerned with winning glory for themselves back in Spain, should they be able to return. And this is features in many of the Spanish expeditions. In fact, the Spaniards themselves remark on this on many occasions from the other side, where they are surprised with how little the natives are tolerant of casualties. And they say in many occasions the Spaniards, they would have been defeated countless times if the Indians would just press their advantage, accept a few casualties and continue going. But often with just a few casualties, it just ends and they retreat. And they could have won had they just pressed forward. But the Spaniards are doing the complete opposite. They're dropping dead on left and right and suffering all sorts of wounds, but continuing to press on because they don't really see that they have any other option. So it's really fascinating meeting of cultures here, and that the events in Mesoamerica, especially at Tenochtitlan, those are a little bit different. There's definitely a lot more casualties on the Mexican side, or the indigenous Mexicans, because it's sort of different. It's not quite the same as in like the expeditions in the Southwest and the Southeast. Those cultures are a little bit more intolerant of casualties, but you got to remember they had his they're basically their god emperor Montezuma captured. Montezuma was the highest status individual in that entire area, and they they took him. They had him captured, and like his death is so anticlimactic. It's almost funny, where he's hit by sling stones from his own people, but it's that's why there's more casualties there. And then they're also like in the city, and so that's like they can't really retreat anywhere. And but it's still a very fascinating account that you probably don't really read the details, and I think that you can't really understand what it's like till you actually read the full account, which we have no reason to believe isn't mostly factual and faithful to the order of events, especially those of battles. I mean, the whole thing is basically supposed to be, I'm sure Cortez is glorifying himself more than he deserves here, but it's still, I think, fairly accurate to the events that happened. So this one was super long. I hope that you enjoyed that, and maybe this one wasn't as engrossing as some of the other ones, but it does. A lot of these Spanish accounts sound very similar to that, where it's just nonstop embattlement and fighting on all sides, and they're just in constant suffering and privation, and people dying and wounded, and they're just barely making it. Oh, and one last thing I want to mention that features in this account is the pitting natives against each other. So the natives of Tezcatlipoca, which he mentions a bunch of the time in there, those were allies of the Spaniards, and this is another thing that's common in the Spanish expedition accounts, and a tactic that they probably also got from the plains of Europe and the battles there, is pitting the natives peoples, or the peoples of the countryside, against each other, figuring out what the alliances are, and using that for their benefit. Because if they didn't have allies, they definitely were not going to make it. They were not going to make any headway. They would have no chance. But because Montezuma had enemies in the countryside of Tezcatlipoca and other places too, they were able to take advantage of that and save their lives, essentially. Like he says at the end of there, he's basically uses Tezcatlipoca as a place to recover, and from there he kind of goes back, and he's trying to go to Veracruz at that point. And anyway, I'll try to find something a little bit more pithy, a little bit more juicy for you for next time. I actually have a bunch of them written down. The Death of La Salle is one of my favorites. I'll need to figure out if I can properly recount that, though. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you made it all the way through to this. I appreciate everyone for watching. I'll take it easy.